Hey, I'm Rick Springfield, and I guess I'm a musician. And I was born in Australia, Sydney, Australia, another one of the colonies, eh? And my dad was in the army, and but was a great singer, but he didn't want to do anything with it. He was very happy just to be in the army and pursue his life in that. I found out later that my mom's big dream for him was to tour America as a singer, and for her to do it with him, which I ended up doing with her. So I guess, you know, the gauntlet's thrown down until it's picked up, and I guess I picked it up. And I started playing. I really wanted to be an Egyptologist, was my first love. My dad was an army officer, but he was really a singer. Had a great voice. Unfortunately, I didn't inherit his voice. But he had a great baritone and was could have done so much. He was a great sprinter, a great athlete, and he just joined the army in the Second World War and just loved it. You know, so he stayed in the army. But we didn't have a TV growing up. I mean, we lived I'm from Australia originally, so we lived in the bush out in Australia, and there was no TVs. So our way of entertaining ourselves at night was to sit around the player piano and sing. And, you know, I'd sing all their old Hot Diggity Dog and all the things, you know, Roger and Hammerstein stuff, Carousel, and that's how we, you know, entertained ourselves. Music just became part of my growing up that way. You know, when the Beatles came along, or actually it was in England. I moved to England when I was a kid. My dad got shipped over there when I was 10 years old. And Cliff and the Shadows, who nobody knows them in America, Cliff Richard and the Shadows, they were huge when I was growing up. They inspired everybody, you know, Jimmy Page, Eric Clapton, the Beatles. I mean, they all were inspired by Cliff and the Shadows. And so that was the music I first heard, and realized that there was, apart from all the musicals that my parents, you know, that I grew up with singing with my parents, there was songs from me as a kid too that spoke to me. And so that's when I discovered rock and roll was over there. There was two things which is always so with young boys and music. It was the discovery of girls at the same time. So the first record I bought, unfortunately, was Hayley Mills' Let's Get Together, but that's just because she was so hot when she was 14 and I was 12. And that was kind of the girl thing. And then Cliff and the Shadows came out, and Hank Marvin is the guitar player. And he had this beautiful red Fender Strat. It was the first one in Europe, and I fell in love with that. Yeah, the red Strat was irrevocably linked with my sexual awakening and girls, and so music has always, you know, that was the whole start of it for me. My parents were. They wanted me to play the piano, but I didn't want to play the piano. They thought the guitar was kind of not really a real instrument. So I started to, you know, lip sync with a tennis racket, looking at myself in the reflection in the living room, you know, French windows, and then I started making them out of cardboard, you know, full-size Fenders, and then I started carving them out of wood, and they finally got the message that I probably should have a real guitar. So I was lip syncing with these guitars for the next 2 or 3 years before they finally said, okay, we'll get this kid a guitar. I was 13 when I got my first one, yeah. And then I promptly sawed it in half, trying to make it look like the red ones that I'd cut out of wood and out of cardboard. And then I had to go buy my own. So, but that was really the first guitar I ever got was this. I'd already decided, I think, by the time I was like 11 or 12, that this is. I didn't realize at first it was disc jockey. You know, I wanted to be a disc jockey, but I knew it was music. And once I started playing guitar, I knew that was it for me. That's the path I wanted to take. I always thought I'd just be a guitar player in a band. I loved the whole band thing, and I never really had any kind of real ideas of going solo. So I started joining high school bands. You know, I had a good friend that you know, the only way you learn at that point is I still can't read music. So you would, you know, get together with a guy that was better than you, and you'd watch him and learn that way, listen to records, try and pick things up off records, and just started playing in high school bands. I wasn't very good student, and all I wanted to do was play music. And I went through this whole depression period of teenage angst, going through 16, 15, 16, 17. I was just a mess. And my parents, they didn't know what to do with me.
Well, a lot of that story is based on my life.
So I was living in Glendale, California, with a girlfriend at the time, and things weren't going very well. I didn't have a record deal in about 4 years, and I just started taking a stained glass class, and I was still writing as much as I could, but I was really lost as to what I should be doing. I'd had some success as an actor at that point, but was really missing being a musician. And so I was at this stained glass class, and I met this couple, and I fell for this girl, and she wouldn't have anything to do with me because she was hooked into her boyfriend. So I went home and wrote a song about them, and his name was Gary, but I didn't like that, so I changed it to Jesse. Just went from band to band to band, and eventually started actually making money, which was incredible. The first one was I was still at high school, and we got like 6 pounds. Back then it was still pounds, which was about, I probably made about like we probably made about $4 each, but I was staggered that they actually paid us. I mean, to this day I'd still do it for nothing. So it was incredible, to actually get paid. I never really supported myself. I mean, I was living at home, and I think it was quite a few years before I was actually making any halfway decent money. But even, I ended up being in a band called Zoot that was one of the top bands in Australia, and we had hits and everything, and I was still only making like probably $80 a weekend or something. I mean, it was awful stuff. It was back when, if you had Australia was a very small scene, which is probably to a degree, the Canadian musicians I know, there's a degree of that too. It started out very, very small. There's only like 6 major cities, and that's it, and you play the pubs in between, and try and avoid getting in a fight, that was pretty much. Where there wasn't a moment where I went, okay, now I'm a professional musician, because I still don't feel that. I mean, it's still fun for me, and it's still a hobby, and it's still something that I can't stop doing and love to do and can't wait to do, But the turning point where I actually said, you know what, where I made the decision to commit my life to it was I'd just been kicked out of high school because I wasn't a very good student, and all I wanted to do was play music, and I went through this whole depression period of teenage angst, going through 16, 15, 16, 17. I was just a mess. And my parents, they didn't know what to do with me, and I was in a band that was, at the time, was made up of, I was the youngest in the band. I was like 16. They were all like 25, and a couple of them had been in prison before. And it was a really rough crowd that I was hanging with. But we were together for the music. They were great with me and everything. It wasn't, but I got into some kind of bad situations a couple of times. And, and there's a lot of drugs around and everything. And my parents were really worried about me. And they said, you got to go back to school. So I said, all right. I hated school, absolutely hated it. So I said, because I was a mess as far as socially. I was just completely socially inept, and it was just a nightmare for me going to school. And I knew there was nothing there for me to learn. I mean, I can read and write, and I'd done my best at socializing, and that was it. And I didn't want to be a geologist. I didn't want to be a history major. I wanted to get out and start being a musician. And so they said, go back to school. So I started getting ready and buying books to go back to a private school where kids who were kicked out of schools kind of went back to try and make something of their lives. And I was just about to go back, and my mom came and said, there's a guy named Pete Watson in the living room, wants to talk to you. And at the time, he was a very famous musician in Australia, and I thought she was kidding. I said, what? He'd seen me playing a coffee bar, and I walked out, and he said, I saw you play in this bar, and we're looking for a guitar player, and we're doing regular gigs, and we're getting paid, and we'd like you to join the band. And that was the first real gig, and I went to my parents, and I said, what should I do? And I thought they'd go, this is ridiculous, you got to go to school and make it, because my mom, even the Beatles back then, they thought they got another couple of years and they're going to be destitute and become plumbers and stuff. So I went out and said, what should I do? And they said, do what you want to do. And that was the changing point in me, that I said, I want to be a musician. I want to play guitar. I didn't say musician, I said I want to play guitar. So I dumped school and went with this guy, and and he was, I learned a lot from him, and that was a start, really. Only when I'm on stage, really, because that's the only time I'm really free. And that is me on stage. You were asking before, how does a socially inept guy get to... Well, I'm not 100% socially inept. There's a part of me that wants to get out there and party and have a great time and, say, hey, look at me, And then there's a certain part of me that's confident about that I have a certain expertise in a certain area, I mean, I've been playing guitar for 35 years, so I don't completely suck as a guitar player, and, and I have a great desire to connect with people.
Just getting it
working
together
in
as
construction.
well. First season, we had so many lessons to learn. We had good dancers, but like
Going up.
I had been really depressed when I was going through adolescence, and that came back to me about 1985 after my first son was born, and I thought I was kind of where I had always hoped I would be, at, the top of my game and things working, and I just started to get more and more depressed, and eventually had to go underground and quit everything, and I became a house husband for quite a few years. I have a very stark moment where in 1985, and I had like 5 years of hits and 5 years of world tours and 5 years of adulation, everything, and I had a big 3-acre ranch in Malibu, and married to a beautiful woman, and had my first child, and everything was great, and I'm walking around the pool going, I'm the most miserable I've ever been in my life, and this isn't the answer. And that was a big, it's easy to say, oh, money's not the answer, success is not the answer, but it is an answer for a while, but it's not the answer to the things that you start running from as a kid, which is what leads you in either running to or running from. They lead you from childhood into what you decide to do with your life. And, a lot of my stuff was inadequacy and, feeling like I wasn't enough, and also having a great passion for music and for the guitar. And so those kind of things fed in. I mean, there's not an entertainer alive that doesn't have somewhere in them, a little kid jumping up and down going, look at me, look at me. So all those things drive you all the way, and at some point you realize that the things that you've fought for to make that pain or make that stuff go away doesn't make it go away. That it's always internal, and it's like people that move all the time. I'm going to make a new start. But six weeks later, all the crap arrives, with its bags, and sets up shop in their head again, and nothing changes until you look into it, and you're still the same jerk you get up with in the morning and you go to bed with. It's honestly, it's all bullshit. All that, you go to bed alone, and that's when the truth happens. That's why people start doing drugs and alcohol and everything, because it knocks them out and they don't have to deal with it. And I know everybody's got. I have quite a degree of all that turmoil in me. It's really up to you to, I can't speak for anybody else, but for me, I had to go through serious therapy, and I still go through it, and I still read, and I still pursue, chasing peace. And nobody will know until they get to a point where they think they've achieved a certain amount of what they're after and realize that it hasn't changed them inside one bit. And, and honestly, I mean, certainly having money gets rid of certain issues. Like, I remember very well the gnawing feeling of having to pay my rent, or worrying about the light bill. I remember that very distinctly, and I also remember very distinctly that going away once I started to make money. And my shoulders started to go down, but then all the other stuff, I had time to think now about all the other stuff, and much darker, deeper stuff came up than worrying about the light bill, and that's what is at the heart of me anyway. And I've never met one. Honestly, I've never personally met one, and I've never personally read about one. And you get into it pretty deeply when you like them, the artists. So the ones that I know, I've never, no one ever does it without. The thing is, great, the irony is that that the pain darken, it just deepens your color, it deepens what you can put out. And you can't, I mean, I'm writing better songs now after all the stuff I've gone through than I was writing when I was 18, 19, obviously. There's much more to say, and I have more in common with somebody who's been through. I'm not the kind of writer that likes people who write story songs. I'd rather, that's why I love people like Peter Gabriel and artists like that who write it from their soul about what's going on inside them and don't just make stuff up about. I always find it kind of pathetic when there's artists my age who are still writing about, chicks and, hot time tonight and all that crap. I mean, there's so much more you could be writing about and so much more is going on inside. And that's what I love to write about. And, when my dad died, it was the only time I could really come to some kind of terms with that was after I'd written a song about it. And that, to me, is my way of getting stuff out. Most of my songs are pretty dark. Cutting music programs in school, it's like the stupidest thing you do. It's like cutting reading and writing. It's crazy to me. And kids, everybody needs to, not needs to, but it would be great for everybody's soul to have music all their lives.
Getting it
Working
together.
in construction, been working
Well, a lot of that story is based on dancers, but
Like going up.
My path that I see is to be a better musician, a better writer, and better at everything that I do as a career. And I'm still very, very hungry. So obviously not much has been satisfied in my climb so far, because I still have a ton of energy for what I'm doing. I'd say 4 or 5, yeah. Been really, I mean, in my life spiritually and everything, it's been probably like 10, the real signposts, because I've always been, and I think they happen to everybody, but unless you're looking for them, I don't think, sometimes you don't recognize it, And I've had a lot of signposts, things saying, don't go this way, but I've gone that way anyway, or this is a way to go, or, here's a possible path. I think just being aware of the consequences. When you're young, you're not aware of the consequences, really. I did terrible things when I was young. And even as a young man, I did awful things. And because hey, I can get away with it, And as you get older and you get kids and you start to see the rise and fall of things, you start to realize that there is a payday at some point. Whether you take the right path or you take the wrong path, the light or the dark path, there's an end game at some point, and I think if anything, I'm still subject to the whole, the temptations and all that kind of thing, and the right way or the wrong way to go, and it's just, I don't think it ever gets easier, or you ever say, okay, I'm cool, I'm there now, I think it's a constant battle, and it always will be, and that's what makes life so exciting. As a business, it's a mess. And completely toast. But music itself is one of the most important things we can do other than learn to read and write, because it lights up a part of our brain that nothing else does. And musicians, there's a part of a brain of a musician that is pretty dormant in a non-musician. But when you listen to music, it lights up that same part of your brain, and nothing else does that. They're cutting music programs in school. It's like the stupidest thing you do. It's like cutting reading and writing. It's crazy to me. And kids, everybody needs to, not needs to, but it would be great for everybody's soul to have music all their lives. And it's incredibly important to me, because that's my main focus. But the music business is toast. I don't know how the music business gets them out there. I know they are. I mean, certainly Muse is huge in England and Europe, but I don't know how radio, how you get a song out there anymore. It's if you're not on American Idol, or you're not one of the 3 divas that the record company's sinking all their money into, I don't know how bands get. It's a different thing. I mean, now you don't go out touring to support an album. You put out an album to support your touring, and the reason you're touring is just to get your record heard, and it's very strange. It's just, it's not strange actually. It's just the next, the next big shift. It's a real step away from me because, in a lot of respects, first of all, I co-wrote it for the first time. I've never co-written before. It's always been a really personal experience for me to write a song, and I finally found a guy that thinks like I do. We're in similar places in our lives, and he plays bass in my band, and his name's Matt Bissonette, and he's incredible. One of the best musicians I've ever met. Absolutely amazing. And we have we're at similar points, like I said, and so we have, we write very, very, very quickly. He's great at moving things forward. Like I take forever to write. I'm not a real prolific writer, and I take forever to record too. I took 9 months and 11 months for the previous 2 albums, and this one took 28 days, and it's the best record I've done in years, and speaks a lot of, from our heart and about things that matter to us, and it's the best sounding record, like I said, I've done in a long time. What's Victoria's Secret, which was the first single, gets the same reaction as Jesse's Girl live, which is incredible because it's one of those songs that it's an undeniable song, like Jesse's Girl was. It's instantaneous, and my audience gets it. And they're really fun to play live, and what Venus in Overdrive is a great audience song too. And we wrote this album the same way I wrote Working Class Dog, which was to write catchy songs that were fun to play, and you didn't have a lot of, you didn't need a lot of, you could just play it with the band. You didn't need any extra stuff. And they work great live, those kind of songs.